G'day everyone and welcome to another episode of Practical Powerlifting. It's been a couple of weeks. It's been a very busy couple of weeks. If you follow me on Instagram or anywhere else, I think that's the only place you would be following me. You'll know that we had our TSF Open on the weekend, which was really busy. That took a lot of time and energy from me. The week before that, we had our end of year max out. So at the gym, a bunch of people doing their end of year testing, as well as our Christmas party. So yeah, busy couple of weeks. It was also my birthday, turned 33. So that was really fun. But yeah, took a lot of energy from me, especially because those things were weekends and the Monday to Friday grind continues. So yes, we're back with another episode of Practical Powerlifting. And as you can see by the title of this episode, we're talking about program design. And specifically, I'm going to come in with the defense of cookie cutter programs. A few weeks ago, or many weeks ago now, in one of the episodes that I did with Jamie Smith, I think it might have been episode 3, we talked a little bit about individualization, and he described individualization as something that emerges from following other training principles rather than its own training principle. So individualization is basically the concept that each individual needs a specific program that's for them, and that each person will have different demands, and that each person will have to have a different program, and that you can't basically copy a program over to someone else and expect similar or the same results. That individuality needs to be respected, and that needs to be reflected in a program. And he argued that you don't necessarily think about people as being different and then write programs for them. Instead, you write programs based on how people are responding to the training, and as a result, individualization will emerge. So it might be very clear. So I'll give you an example. On one hand, you might be a coach and you might say, okay, I have this one lifter who has, let's say a shoulder injury. And because of that shoulder injury, I'm going to take that into consideration because they're an individual, and I'm going to give them slightly less bench press volume than lifter B, who doesn't have a shoulder injury. So one lifter does 15 sets of bench press a week, another one does 12 sets of bench press a week, for example. Whereas the way that Jamie describes it is you almost don't even think about them having a shoulder injury. You both give them, say, for example, 14 sets of bench press a week. And the one that has a chronic shoulder injury reports, hey, my shoulder's been flaring up. And as a result of that, you adjust and you bring the volume down. The other person is responding well, has no pain or no injuries, is recovering well. And they say, hey, coach, I'm feeling good. And so as a result of that, as a result of fatigue management, training management, other concepts, you bring the training volume up and you say, okay, instead of doing 14 sets a week, it's 14 sets a week, let's try 15 sets a week or 16 sets a week. So then when you look at their training programs, you will see individualization. You will see that these two people are doing different programs. And how we got there is kind of different. On one hand, you have preemptively individualize a program, whereas on the other hand, the individualization is a result of other training principles, other considerations, things that just kind of happen on their own. When I first started lifting and first started training seriously, it was very common to follow programs that we found on the internet, right? Because I started lifting in, let's say 2010, 2011. I did my first powerlifting meet in 2013. At the time, online coaching or coaching information was very scarce. There weren't people like myself that are uploading podcasts and YouTube videos. There weren't any big YouTube channels. There weren't many articles online. It was very hard to kind of gather resources and information. There were lots of, I lied, there were lots of articles and lots of written texts online, and accompanying those texts were often programs. And so anybody that grew up or was active in powerlifting in that time will remember things like Strong Lifts 5x5, Shaco programs, starting strength, these types of programs where it would just be like a plain text file, not even like a spreadsheet, that just explains what the program is. Smolov's, obviously, the Russian programs. And by definition, these programs were cookie cutter, right? These were generic programs. These weren't meant to be taken with specific people in mind. They were just broad programs. People ran these programs and people improved. People took starting strength, people took Shaco programs. They ran those programs and they improved. And modern day powerlifting will have you believe that individualization is like one of the most critical aspects of powerlifting coaching. And in many ways that is true, right? We are all individuals. We have individual needs. We have different goals, different injury histories, different backgrounds, different contraindications, different everything, right? However, my contention today is that cookie cutter programs are not as bad as they seem, and that cookie cutter programs give us the foundation from which individualization can emerge. A lot of my training partners at this time in the early 2010s would run these types of programs. Heck, I ran some of these programs. And a conversation that I reflect on now that I had numerous times was how people made modifications to those programs. They would say things like, oh, I'm running small of junior, but instead of doing bench on day 4, I'm actually doing an incline bench press. Or I'm running starting strength, but instead of starting at 90% of my 95% 1RM, which was a thing. I don't know if that was starting strength. Maybe that was a different program. That might have been a shaker program as well. But instead of doing it like this, I'm doing it like that. Or the program says to train 3 days a week, but I've actually spread it across 4 days a week. Or whatever it might be. This is literally individualization. This is individualization emerging from base programs. I think it would be totally ingenuine for any powerlifting coach to pretend like they write every program for every client from scratch. Okay, no successful powerlifting coach that has a healthy roster of lifters is writing programs from scratch based on the things that their lifters are telling them in their, discovery call or whatever it may be, and totally individualizing a program from day one. I would bet my bottom dollar that 99% of coaches are giving new clients relatively generic cookie cutter programs, are giving relatively repeatable programs that they've used before, right? More or less copied and pasted. These two concepts of individualization, or these two approaches that I've described, one being like a apply it early based on feedback, and the other is it emerges later. I think most coaches kind of do this naturally, or at least I do it. I don't know. I think most coaches do this. If I get a new lifter and I give them a cookie cutter program, I might make some minor modifications preemptively based on things that they've said or done or whatever, but it's still going to be a program that I've run before. And then over time, as they go through these programs or this program or programs, as I gather their response, as I get feedback, as we see their training response, if they're improving or if they're not improving, whatever may be happening, modifications get made to the program or to the programs. Some of them were predictive and things I was expecting anyway. Other times unexpected. Sometimes a lifter is not responding the way that I was expecting, and we make changes as we go. And so the term cookie cutter program is a term that we use to basically denigrate or to talk down on certain programming style. But I think the irony is that we all do it. Like all powerlifting coaches use some form of generic template cookie cutter program. Now, of course, it would be totally dishonest as well to just give true cookie cutter programs, like literally the same things to multiple people constantly with no modification, with no thought. Like that would be dishonest. That would be doing a disservice to your clients. And that would be, not great, to be honest. But I think some level of template programming is used basically by all coaches. In my early days of lifting, again, well, not as early as what I was talking about prior, but when I was training at Melbourne University, some lifters remember Robert Wilkes was the coach there, and he ran true cookie cutter programs. All right, anybody that trained with him or around that time will remember the 3x5s program. It's the program that he taught in the coaching course for anybody in the Powerlifting Australia days that remembers this. So for those that don't know, he basically used the same program with everyone. Like it was a 3-day week program. It was a linear periodization style, no top sets, lots of specificity. He had a group of accessories that he would use. He had a heavy day for the main lifts and a light day for the main lifts. So the heavy day was something like a 3x5 ramping up every week. And the lighter day was also a 3x5, but like at 80% or 70% of the weight that you used on the main day. He ran this for everybody. Like he literally just used the same program for everybody. And naturally there was a lot of criticism of this, amongst members of the gym, broader community. But using this training style, he produced some very, very good athletes. Just to name a few, Nipaloo broke open deadlift world record. Jan Fei Zhao, who's currently, not numerous time Australian champion at the time, went to a Worlds. Tony Reinmuth, who's now squatted 400 kilos plus, but at the time, again, Australian champion. numerous Australian champions, numerous record breakers. And so as a budding coach, I was witnessing someone directly in front of me running cookie cutter programs and getting great results, which was very contrary to much of the messaging and much of my understanding of what training was, that people need different things. What was my takeaway from this experience? What did I learn from this experience? I think one of the biggest strengths of running cookie cutter style programs or running template programs is it gives you, as a coach, the opportunity to develop pattern recognition, to develop intuition. Because he ran the same programs, the same preps constantly, he'd seen the same prep done like hundreds, if not thousands of times. And so when people's performance weren't going in the trajectory that was expected or that he'd want, he was fully capable of tweaking it on the fly, making changes week to week based on what he was seeing, choosing the weights for the next week, choosing the trajectory with which he wanted to take someone, making changes to accessories if needed, because he'd done it the same way so many times. I liken it a little bit to like cooking or baking. You have your certain recipe, and if you run the recipe enough times, it becomes something that you know so well that it's very easy to make adjustments if there are mistakes, or if you've got more guests to feed, or you might not have the ingredients that you wanted, but you know the recipe so freaking well that it gives you the opportunity to understand those things on a deeper level. I use the cooking analogy one step deeper, and that is that a cook that knows the recipe well, an amateur cook that knows the recipe well, is much better than a professional cook that doesn't know the recipe well. What I mean by that is that if you are running a system that you know well, if you are running programs that you as a coach know well, that you understand the concepts, the theories, the patterns, the plans, the trajectory of, you will be better equipped to provide that system to your lifter than a better system that you don't understand, or that you don't know how to manipulate, or you don't know how to control, that you don't know how to troubleshoot for. It's very easy for coaches to feel the need to, of course, stay up to date. Don't get me wrong. Like, staying up to date, learning constantly is like part of being any working professional in any industry, of course. But at some point, buckling down and committing to relatively fewer concepts is important. And we see that in very successful coaches. Like, I think the most famous example of this is Mike Teixeira's RTS. RTS, Reactive Training Systems, is a coaching group, and they've become very famous for obviously RPE style training. But even beyond that, they've become very famous for, it's escaped me the name of the iterative weekly program that they do. Emerging strategies. They become very, very famous for this programming style, emerging strategies. Is it the best training style ever? Arguably yes or no. But is it one that the coaches of RTS know very well, know how to manipulate, know how to control, know how to troubleshoot for? Absolutely. And when a coach knows their system and knows the theory and knows all of that stuff really well, they are better able to deliver that service. They're better able to deliver that program to the individuals with which they're working, and could arguably get better results than a coach, for example, that knows every coaching style, but none of them well. It's like the master of, what is it? The jack of all trades is the master of none. And so to defend cookie cutter programs is actually to give coaches, or to empower coaches to realize, hey, you don't need to know every style, although it's helpful. And I think you should try to continue to learn and broaden your spectrum, and your style can shift over time. But knowing certain programs and knowing how they work is far more important. There's also a further practical application, or further practical point about this kind of programming style, is it means that it allows a coach to be productive and useful with their time. Like, using template programs, I can write a whole program for someone in 15 minutes, 20 minutes, maybe 30 minutes. I know coaches that do it much faster. If I had to write a program from scratch for every person, that would take 2 hours. That might take 2.5 hours maybe. And I don't think any reasonable client wants to be paying for 2.5 hours of labor when they could be paying for half an hour labor to get a program that's arguably better, or if it's not better, 95% as good, right? And so there is definitely a huge practical element to this. It is a capitalistic system that we're in, where clients are paying for time and resources and energy. And so having a fully customized program is almost like a bit of a, it's almost like a bit of a red flag in some sense. Like, it's almost a bit of a cliche as well, because again, it doesn't really exist. Like, every coach has their bias. You see this if you're on social media. Let's say if you follow numerous clients of the same coach, they often go through waves where, like, maybe a lot of them are doing the same exercise, like a specific exercise that's just in vogue, or a specific training style, or a certain modality or something. It just comes up all the time. One that comes to my mind immediately is previous guest Victor Liu. Had a period recently where a lot of his clients were doing AMRAPs and what he called RPE calibration sets. So a lot of lifters were doing the same thing. Admittedly, that's not really necessarily training style. It's more just like a tool, I suppose. But like, things like that happen all the time. A lot of a coach might go through a phase where they're really into, I don't know, accommodating resistance, or unilateral work, or a certain machine at their gym, or whatever it might be. It's just so normal. And giving numerous clients the same exercise or the same modality is actually a great way to kind of see the benefits or see how it works, to try to tease out patterns. Because if every one of your lifters in your roster is doing something completely different, it's impossible to draw inferences. It's impossible to notice the patterns where, when you decide, hey, I'm going to give 10 of my lifters, I've got these 10 lifters recently that finished a comp, I'm going to give them this, new training modality I've been thinking about, or I read an article about. I'm going to try it and see how they respond. Of the 10, within 3 weeks, 8 of them come back and say, hey, my shoulder's starting to bug me. Immediately, like, okay, cool, we're not doing that anymore. Okay, good, I'm glad we learned that lesson. Or the reverse happens where, after a couple of months, they're responding really well and they're improving. You go, oh, actually, this is working really well, but it didn't work for these 2. Why was that the case? Why was it so successful, these 8, but these 2 didn't work? Oh, okay, I think it's because of these reasons. Now I can extrapolate this and apply this training modality to a larger sample of my client base, excluding people who I think it won't work for, right? And so you can see how this gets applied, and how coaches use, their lifter base as a means of kind of gathering information as to what's working and what's not working, and it all becomes like a collaborative, not necessarily collaborative, but like a larger scale thing, rather than just like trialing things on an individual level where you're not expecting them to work. Anyway, looping back to what I was saying before about time and labor, is that by having programs that are neat and tidy and fast and easy to apply, it does free up resources from the coach to be able to service more people, charge less, and essentially be more productive, be more efficient with their time and energy and resources. Okay, that's all I want to share today. A defense of cookie cutter programs. I'd be curious to hear what you think, what your thoughts are. If cookie cutter programs have their place in powerlifting, or is total individualization necessary? Did I miss the mark on this episode, or do you totally agree with some things I've had to say? Let me know, and I appreciate you paying attention, listening, and I'll talk to you next time. Bye.